Imagine boarding a plane with a golden ticket, a first-class seat that promises comfort, respect, and a glimpse of your dreams taking flight. For 16-year-old Nia Lambert, that ticket was supposed to be a symbol of achievement, a quiet celebration of years of hard work and unshakable resilience. But what if that very seat became a stage for silent hostility, invisible barriers, and a cruel accusation that threatened not just her dignity but her very identity? What happens when a young black girl, calm and composed, is ignored, dismissed, and then publicly accused of theft, not because of evidence, but because of the color of her skin and the assumptions people make? How far would you go to defend your truth in a world quick to judge and slow to listen? And what if the man watching all of this unfold was not just any passenger, but the CEO of the airline and her father flying undercover to uncover the harsh realities his company refuses to see? This is a story about courage, injustice, and the quiet power of dignity in the face of prejudice. It is about what it means to be truly seen and heard when the world tries to make you invisible. If this story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's start this journey together. The air in Gate 47 at San Francisco International buzzed with quiet energy. Rolling suitcases clattered gently over the polished floor. An overhead announcement called out a final boarding for a flight to Seoul. But none of that mattered to 16-year-old Nia Lambert. She sat upright in a navy hoodie and cream canvas pants, clutching a small leather-bound astronomy journal in her lap. Her dark curls were pulled into a low puff, tidy but not severe. Her boarding pass peeked out from the pocket of her hoodie, the print slightly worn at the edges from her thumb brushing over it again and again. Seat 1A, first class. She had read that seat number a dozen times since arriving at the airport, not out of disbelief but reverence. It wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol, a message, a memory stitched from every evening she spent lying on a picnic blanket with her dad, pointing up at stars neither of them could name yet. She exhaled slowly, watching the line at the gate shrink. Her flight, Equinox, Air 307 to Zurich, would depart in 40 minutes. The summer program at ETH Zurich's Astrophysics Institute was one of the most competitive in the world. Just 10 students from the United States were selected. Nia had written her application essay about black holes and the way they bend time, how their silence might echo our own human invisibility. She didn't tell anyone how personal it really was, not even her dad. A vibration in her pocket, a text from Dad, Starlight, you're about to board your future. And yes, I upgraded your seat. I figured it was time you saw the front of the plane for once. You earned this. Nia smiled, heart full. Her dad had always called her Starlight. Since the very first time she pointed at Orion's belt and got all 3 stars right, he was the one who taught her to be curious, patient, and brave. She texted back quickly, "Thanks, Dad. I'll try not to spill ginger ale on the champagne." The reply came with a single emoji sunglasses. The line moved forward. A boarding announcement chimed overhead. First-class passengers were called. Nia rose to her feet, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and approached the gate agent. The woman scanned her pass with a polite smile, but did a double-take at the seat number. Her eyes flicked briefly from Nia's face to her clothes and back again. "Enjoy your flight. Miss Lambert." It was neutral, not warm, not cold, but neutral could feel sharp when placed beside everything else. Nia walked through the jet bridge, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She breathed in the air of the cabin, a mix of lavender, citrus, and something metallic. As she stepped into first class, the difference was instant. The lighting was soft, almost golden. The seats were private pods, each lined with cream leather, chrome accents, and wide screens. Fresh orchids were tucked into tiny vases beside the touchscreen consoles. Every inch of it whispered exclusivity. She found her seat easily. 1A, front left corner. A full cocoon with a view of the galley wall and just a sliver of the window. Nia paused a moment, overwhelmed. This was more than she had expected. She had assumed first class just meant more leg room and a free snack. This looked like a hotel room had fallen in love with a spaceship. "Can I help you?" came a voice, brittle and tight. Nia turned. A flight attendant stood beside her, hands clasped too firmly at her waist. Her uniform was crisp, her makeup impeccable. Her name tag read Colleen. Nia offered a polite smile. "Yes, thank you. I'm in 1A. Colleen glanced at the boarding pass Nia extended, but didn't take it in hand. She leaned in slightly, squinting. Her lips tightened. "All right," Colleen said, stepping back. "Just make sure your bag fits fully under the ottoman. We have limited overhead space up here. I'll keep it at my feet," Nia said, lowering her backpack gently. "It's just my laptop and some books." Colleen offered a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She turned and disappeared into the galley. Nia sat down slowly. The leather was cool and smooth under her fingers. She took out her astronomy journal, opened to the last page, and made a quiet note. Equinox Air 307, June 5th, Zurich. First class feels surreal, like a secret no one thought I'd find. A soft chime signaled another round of boarding. A couple entered the cabin. Nia noticed the woman first dressed in pearls and a silk shawl, her blonde hair styled in waves. The man wore a sharp blazer, tapping at his smartwatch. They moved toward seats 1C and 1D, just across from Nia. The woman's gaze lingered. Nia nodded politely. The woman didn't smile back. Instead, she leaned slightly toward her husband and whispered something. He chuckled under his breath. Nia turned her eyes back to her journal. She remembered her father's words. "You don't owe anyone a performance, Nia. You just have to hold your ground, quietly, if needed." Just then, another crew member passed by, a young Latino man with kind eyes and a nervous energy. He offered a friendly nod as he moved down the aisle. His name tag read Diego. "Good evening," he said softly. "We'll be offering pre-departure drinks shortly. Let us know if you need anything." "Thanks," Nia replied. He smiled. "A real one. The kind that made you feel like you were visible." But before she could ask for water, Colleen called out from the galley, "Diego, let's keep first class on schedule. Start with the Whitmores. Champagne first." "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice tightening. Nia glanced at her seat screen. It blinked a welcome message. She exhaled slowly. The engines had not yet started, but already the air in this cabin felt thick. The cabin doors hadn't even closed yet, and already Nia felt the pressure in her chest. She adjusted the strap on her backpack, carefully sliding it into the small storage nook below her seat. Her fingers brushed over the edge of her laptop case, then over her worn copy of Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. It was her comfort book, a ritual she returned to every time she traveled. Her dad had given it to her 3 years ago with a note scribbled in the front, because your mind already travels faster than light. She had just settled into the seat when Colleen appeared again. "Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" Colleen asked flatly, her voice a clipped monotone that felt more like obligation than service. Nia straightened slightly, startled. "Yes, please. Just some still water." Colleen gave a single nod and turned without another word. Nia watched her glide down the aisle, heels clicking softly on the carpet. The sound disappeared as Colleen stopped at the seats across from her. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," Colleen said, and suddenly her tone transformed. Her voice took on a warmth that hadn't existed moments earlier. "It's such a pleasure to have you with us again. The usual for you both." Eleanor Whitmore's laughter tinkled through the cabin. "Of course, darling. It wouldn't be a flight without your champagne." "Excellent," Colleen said with a smile so wide and polished it looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. "We have the 2008 Cuvée Louise chilled and ready." Within seconds, 2 tall, gleaming flutes arrived on a silver tray, served with ceremony and deference. Nia watched, not in jealousy but in quiet disbelief. Her seat was only a few feet away, but she felt worlds apart. Time passed, 5 minutes, then 10. There was still no sign of the water she had asked for. Nia glanced over at the galley. She could see Colleen now in animated conversation with another crew member. Her back turned. She wasn't holding anything. Nia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She didn't want to make a scene. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe. Her fingers reached up to the call button but hesitated. Then she saw Diego again. He was returning from the far side of the cabin, carefully helping another passenger with a pillow. He met her eyes, offered a quiet, reassuring nod, and walked toward her seat. "Hi there," he said gently. "Did you request something earlier?" Nia nodded. "Just some water before we take off. I asked Ms. Briggs, but maybe she forgot." Diego's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. I'll take care of that right away." He disappeared into the galley. A moment later, Colleen's voice floated from the same space. She wasn't whispering, not exactly, but her voice was pitched just low enough to sting without drawing attention. "She can wait. Prioritize Mr. Emerson in 3C. He's one of our Sapphire Club members. We're not running a snack bar." Diego didn't respond immediately. Nia saw only his silhouette through the curtain. He returned a few moments later, empty-handed and looking flustered. "I'm really sorry. Things are a little hectic right now. I'll make sure we get you something once we're in the air." Nia nodded silently. There was no point pushing, not yet. She leaned back in her seat and let her eyes drift toward the window, where the dusk light was beginning to fade from gold to lavender. Somewhere out there, her dad was watching this same sky, probably with a coffee in hand and his phone set to silent. She thought of his words again. Hold your ground. Quietly, if needed. It wasn't just about dignity. It was about not letting the world change who you are in response to who they assume you are. The cabin grew quieter as the final boarding announcements played and the flight attendants moved through final safety checks. "Cabin secure," Colleen said briskly to the cockpit. "All passengers accounted for." Nia glanced down the aisle as the door closed. From the sliver of space between the curtains, she caught a glimpse of the economy cabin, and her breath caught. There, seat 41A, Jerome Lambert, her father. He was slouched comfortably in a window seat, reading a newspaper folded tightly in his lap. He wore the same green Celtics hoodie he always traveled in and his favorite cap, pulled low over his brow. He hadn't told her he was on the same flight. She blinked, unsure for a moment if it was really him. Then he looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and offered a small nod, just once, barely noticeable. Nia turned quickly back toward the front, heart pounding. What was he doing back there? He had told her he was flying out later, on a different flight, for a meeting. Was this intentional? She looked down at her lap, her thoughts racing. Why had he lied? Was he checking on her, watching the way things were handled? A quiet realization crept over her. No, not watching, observing. Jerome Lambert had built a career as a systems thinker, someone who didn't just fix problems, he dismantled the flawed structures that allowed them to exist, and he was doing it again, silently. Nia felt a strange mix of comfort and anger. She was glad he was here, but also confused. Did he expect her to act differently because he was watching? Was this some kind of test? A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Would you like to browse our dinner menu?" "Ms." Lambert Colleen stood before her once more, holding out a leather-bound menu. Her smile was back, but hollow. Nia took the menu with both hands and nodded politely. "Thank you." Colleen didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, swaying gently with the motion of the plane as the engines roared to life. Nia opened the menu and scanned the offerings. Everything looked rich, heavy. She had pre-ordered a vegan meal weeks ago when booking the flight. She hoped it had made it on board. She hoped someone had checked. As the plane lifted into the night sky, climbing over the Pacific and into the dark, Nia leaned her head gently against the cool panel of her pod and let the city lights slip away beneath her. But there was no wonder in her eyes, only stillness, a quiet mind turning over silent calculations. She had boarded the flight expecting to feel closer to the stars. Instead, she felt the distance between her and the people around her widen with every passing minute. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, casting a golden haze over the first-class cabin. The silence was almost too curated, filled with the muted hum of engines, the rustle of newspapers, and the faint clink of ice in crystal tumblers. Nia sat upright in her seat, hands resting on her lap. She had finally received her water, a lukewarm glass placed down without a word from Colleen 15 minutes after takeoff. No eye contact, no apology, just a silent offering dropped like an afterthought. She took a slow sip, her throat dry not from thirst but from the growing sense that she was an intruder in a world meticulously designed to exclude her. Every detail whispered belonging, but not to her. Across the aisle, Eleanor Whitmore laughed softly at something her husband mumbled. She reached for her flute of champagne and tipped it toward her seatmate before taking a delicate sip. Her bracelets clinked gently against the stem of the glass. One of them, gold with a single dangling pearl, caught the light and reflected it briefly in Nia's direction. Eleanor noticed. She stared directly at Nia for just a second too long, then turned away. Nia didn't flinch. She had spent years being the only black girl in advanced science classes, the only one in robotics club, the only one presenting at the state science fair. She had built an armor of quiet resolve, not because she liked silence, but because it was often the only defense that worked. Still, this was different. This wasn't a school auditorium or a lab. This was supposed to be a place of comfort, a reward, a moment of rest earned through relentless effort. And here, she was being reminded with every glance and every omission that her presence required justification. The curtain between first class and business swung briefly open as Diego emerged, a small cart behind him. He approached Nia's seat with a soft smile. "Ms. Lambert," he said gently, "we're starting dinner service. Did you happen to pre-select a meal with us?" "Yes, I ordered the vegan option," she replied. "I confirmed it during booking. It should be in the system." Diego nodded and tapped on a tablet clipped to the side of the cart. His brow furrowed as he scrolled. "I'm not seeing it here," he said with a small frown. "Let me double-check with the galley manifest." Nia offered a polite smile. "Thanks. I'm sure it's just an oversight." He nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Moments later, Colleen appeared in his place. No cart, no smile, just arms crossed and a jaw set firm. "I understand you requested a special meal," she said. Nia kept her voice calm. "Yes, I ordered the vegan risotto during booking." Colleen tilted her head, her mouth forming a thin, patient line. "Well, I don't have that listed for this seat," she said, her tone implying finality. "We have 2 options available tonight, pan-seared halibut or filet mignon, if you'd prefer. I can have a small side salad prepared." There was no apology, no effort to investigate, just a tone that made it clear Nia was becoming an inconvenience. "I really can't eat either of those," Nia said quietly. "Would you mind checking again with your team?" Colleen raised an eyebrow. "The catering for this cabin is loaded based on our manifest. We cannot accommodate changes once we're airborne." The word accommodate struck a nerve. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it used like that. As if her basic needs were extra, optional. "I understand," Nia said, her voice still even. "Then I'll take the salad." "Thank you." Colleen turned without acknowledgement and walked away. The silence she left behind rang louder than any turbulence. A few rows down, Eleanor leaned toward Bryce. "Vegan," she murmured, not even bothering to lower her voice. That's usually code for cheap. Bryce chuckled. Probably her first time up here. Looks like her school paid for it. Nia stared straight ahead, her posture perfect. Her hands remained still on the armrest, but beneath the surface. Her muscles tensed with restraint. She had the urge to speak, to correct them, to throw out a line that would make them feel the weight of their ignorance. But what would that do? They weren't speaking to her. They weren't even speaking about her. Not really. They were narrating their version of the world, a version where people like Nia didn't belong in seat 1A unless someone had made a clerical error. Jerome saw it all. From 41A, he could see through the aisle and into the periphery of the first-class curtain. His phone rested on his knee. A note app open. His thumb hovered just above the screen before he started typing again. Flight 307, F.A. Colleen. Refused to verify missing special meal for passenger Lambert. Seat 1A. Offered only salad after minimal engagement. Tone dismissive. Pattern of devaluation confirmed. Passenger remained composed. Whitmore comments recorded. He paused for a moment, eyes flicking to the forward cabin again. He had wanted this mission to be anonymous. Clean. He wanted to see his airline as a customer would, not as a CEO with power, but as a father with a daughter traveling alone. Now. His blood simmered. He had worked in aviation long enough to know that what happened in first class often mirrored what happened across a corporation. Culture started from the front and seeped backward. What he was seeing wasn't an isolated incident. It was systemic rot, carefully wrapped in pressed uniforms and complimentary champagne. The curtain swished again. Diego reappeared with a tray and a quiet apology. "I'm so sorry. Ms. Lambert. I looked through our backup storage and manifest records. It looks like the vegan meal was omitted during final catering load. I've brought you a mixed green salad, and I added some fresh fruit on the side. I know it's not what you ordered." Nia nodded gently. "Thank you. Diego, I appreciate you trying." He paused, looking conflicted, then leaned in slightly. "For what it's worth," he whispered, "this isn't right. You're not imagining it." Nia blinked. Those words shouldn't have meant so much. But they did. She gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak. Diego moved on, and Nia picked up her fork. The salad was dry, the fruit was bland, but what left the bitterest taste wasn't on her tray. It was the knowledge that, for some people, it didn't matter how hard you worked or how far you climbed. To them, you would always be someone who didn't quite fit the frame, not without explanation, not without proof, not without permission. And tonight, Nia Lambert was tired of asking. The cabin lights dimmed again after dinner service, the simulated starlight effect illuminating the ceiling with thousands of pinpricks of blue and gold. To most passengers, it was a calming touch. To Nia Lambert, it felt more like camouflage for discomfort than ambiance. She shifted in her seat, her tray now cleared and her stomach still mostly empty. The meager salad had been more insult than nourishment, and the fruit felt like an afterthought. She wasn't hungry anymore, though. She was heavy with something else. Nia kept her expression neutral, trained from years of being the only one in the room. It was a skill, a form of endurance that required silence without submission, stillness without shrinking. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the real stars, the ones that lived beyond the decorative lights, beyond the hull of this plane, the ones that made her feel endless instead of confined. She opened her journal, flipping past notes on light years and gravitational lenses until she found a blank page. Her pen hovered. Before she could write, movement in her periphery caught her attention. Eleanor Whitmore had turned in her seat, angled slightly toward Nia as if she were lining up a better view. Nia ignored it at first, but then she heard the sound. Not words exactly, just a deliberate exhale of disapproval, the kind of breath people used when they wanted to say something without owning it. She glanced up. Eleanor quickly looked away, pretending to adjust her blanket. Next to her, Bryce scrolled through his tablet, the glow casting sharp angles on his face. He didn't speak, but Nia saw the sideways glance he gave her. It was casual, dismissive, almost bored, but it carried a message. You do not belong here. The worst part wasn't the look itself. It was how familiar it felt. She closed her journal gently. The cabin was quiet, but not peaceful. The silence felt curated, maintained, not the kind that welcomed sleep, but the kind that warned you not to speak too loudly. Colleen reappeared like clockwork, moving down the aisle with a small tray of mints and herbal tea options. When she reached Nia, her hand hovered over the tray without offering it. Nia looked up, then at the tray. "May I have some chamomile?" "Please." Colleen didn't answer immediately. She made a small motion, picked up a bag, and handed it to Nia without a word. Then she moved on. Not a nod, not a smile, nothing. Across the aisle, Eleanor received her tea with a soft compliment. "Your scarf is lovely, Mrs. Whitmore." "Oh, thank you, dear," Eleanor responded. "It's Hermes. My husband picked it up in Paris." Bryce didn't even look up, but Nia could see the faint smirk on his face. She wondered if they even noticed what they were doing, or if it had become such a reflex that there was no difference between a snub and small talk. Nia placed the tea on her side table and stared at it. Steam rose in slow spirals, the scent of dried flowers doing little to soothe the sting behind her eyes. She reached for the remote beside her seat and turned on the entertainment screen. It blinked, then froze. She tried again. The same result. A third time. Still nothing. She held down the reset button, just in case, then waited. The screen flickered, then returned to the home menu. The cursor moved erratically, jumping 2 spaces, then none. She pressed the call button. Several minutes passed. Nothing. She pressed it again. Finally, Diego appeared, slightly out of breath. "Sorry for the delay, Ms. Lambert. We've been a little backed up." "It's okay," she said. "I think my screen is frozen, or maybe glitching. It won't play anything." Diego leaned in and tapped a few buttons. Let me try rebooting it from the galley panel." He disappeared behind the curtain. A few moments later, Colleen emerged. "What seems to be the issue here?" she asked, her voice flat. Nia turned to her. "My screen's not working. Diego said he'd try to reset it." Colleen looked at the screen, then back at Nia. "Well, sometimes that happens. It's likely just a minor glitch. It'll probably sort itself out. I tried multiple times. It keeps going back to the home menu. We're about to begin our rest cycle. I suggest you focus on sleeping instead of troubleshooting." Then she turned to Diego, who had reappeared quietly. "Help me with turndown in rows 3 and 4, please." Diego hesitated. His eyes met Nia's briefly. There was a flicker of conflict. Then he nodded and followed Colleen toward the rear. Nia was left staring at a blank screen. Literally, metaphorically. She turned it off. She turned off the overhead light, too. If they didn't want her to be seen, fine. She would be quiet, not because they demanded it, but because she chose to be. In the quiet dark of her pod, Nia leaned her head against the cushioned wall and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to breathe, to count. She counted backward from 50, then forward again. Then imagined a solar flare, imagined the surface of the sun erupting, a dance of plasma and chaos that no one could silence. From the economy cabin. Jerome sat upright in 41A, his eyes fixed on the reflection of his daughter's pod, just visible through the window of the curtain. He had seen Colleen's face when she turned away. He had seen how Diego's posture slumped after being overruled. His hands rested on his phone. His notes app open again. Colleen. Turned down service. Ignored faulty screen. Dismissed passenger concern. Tone defensive. No resolution provided. Pattern is no longer circumstantial. He scrolled back and reviewed the previous entries. The water, the meal, the tea, the looks, the entertainment screen. Each moment might be justifiable in isolation. But together, they painted a picture he could no longer unsee. He had hoped, deep down, that maybe it would be different. That maybe his daughter could step into first class and be treated like any other young traveler with a dream. Instead, she had been tested, not in science, not in logic, but in patience, in presence, and she had passed, not with resistance, but with restraint. Still, Jerome knew the cabin crew hadn't reached the end of their cruelty yet. There was a quiet storm building. He could feel it, and he would let it build. He had not spent his life building companies, shaping cultures, and mentoring leaders just to allow this kind of behavior to fester inside the very system he now controlled. But he needed the whole picture. He needed the ugly truth in full view. And that truth, he feared, had one more chapter before it could no longer be ignored. He looked again toward the front, where his daughter sat unseen in a seat she had earned. The silence in the sky held its breath. Somewhere over the North Atlantic, the sky outside the window had gone completely black. The stars, hidden behind layers of cloud and altitude? Nia Lambert had not touched the cup of tea resting on the tray next to her. It had long gone cold. She had spent the last 30 minutes pretending to sleep. It was easier than trying to make conversation or navigate the silent battlefield of first-class hospitality. Easier than reading. Easier than feeling the eyes that never quite looked at her directly but always hovered on the edge of judgment. The screen in front of her was still dead. The read-in light remained off. The tea was cold. Her stomach, still mostly empty, had begun to curl in on itself. The last proper meal she'd had was hours ago at the airport, just a protein bar and a bottle of water. As if summoned by thought, Colleen reappeared, gliding past with the ease of routine. Her heels clicked softly over the carpet as she pushed a compact cart with white linen draped over the top. On it were gleaming trays, artfully plated entrees, and carafes of wine nestled into carved compartments. The smell of roasted garlic and buttered herbs drifted through the cabin. Dinner service, round two, real food, the premium dining experience Equinox Air boasted about in every glossy brochure. "Miss Lambert," Colleen said, stopping beside Nia's pod. "Dinner choice." Her voice was as neutral as it had been earlier. No smile, no eye contact. Nia sat up a little straighter, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I think I already ordered the salad earlier," she said. Since the vegan meal wasn't available, Colleen glanced down at her notepad and scribbled something without a nod or reply. "I'll be back shortly." As she moved to the next row, her expression changed like a switch. The corners of her mouth lifted, her tone warmed. "Mr. Emerson, we have your halibut ready. I paired it with a Sancerre that I think you'll love. May I serve now?" Nia listened as the conversation flowed, as the sound of the silverware chimed, as wine poured gently into crystal. Across from her, Eleanor Whitmore received her filet mignon with audible delight. "Oh, it smells heavenly," she gushed. "Just as you remembered. I hope," Colleen replied. Bryce grunted in satisfaction as his plate was set down. When Colleen returned to Nia, she handed over the tray wordlessly. It was smaller than the others. No dome cover, no wine pairing, no linen. On it sat a basic salad, some pale mixed greens with shaved carrot and 2 slices of cucumber. A lemon wedge lay on the side like punctuation. Nia blinked. "Is this everything?" she asked softly. "We don't carry additional options beyond the catered manifest," Colleen said. "This is all that can be provided tonight." "I understand," Nia replied. "I was just hoping maybe something warm." Colleen looked down at her, expression carefully blank. "I'm afraid not." Then she turned and walked away. Nia picked up the fork and pushed at the leaves. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. What she felt was harder to name. Something beneath anger. Something quieter. A kind of grief for the expectation she'd let herself believe in. She chewed slowly, trying to ignore the warm smells of dinner surrounding her. She glanced across the aisle. Eleanor was sipping red wine, her plate practically steaming. Eleanor leaned closer to Bryce. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, voice carrying too far. She turned down both entrees and asked for salad. "Probably thinks vegan is code for free." Bryce laughed under his breath. Her daddy must have pulled every string to get that seat. Nia's fork froze. She stared down at the plate, no longer seeing the food. She thought of the nights spent poring over applications, of the projects she submitted, the awards she won, the solar simulation she built from scratch, the final essay she wrote about how star systems are born from pressure and darkness. She thought of how hard she worked, and still, people like the Whitmores assumed she was a favor, an exception, a fraud. Her throat tightened. In the back of the plane, Jerome Lambert sat forward in his seat, watching the quiet war unfold. His notes app was open again. Passenger denied warm meal. Tray served without standard presentation. Salad not equivalent to other options. Comments from Whitmore passengers indicate clear class and racial prejudice. No action taken by lead FA. He added a new line. Passenger remains composed, did not escalate, exhibiting resilience beyond expectation. He wanted to get up, to walk straight down the aisle and say what needed to be said, but this was not the moment. He needed the record. He needed the pattern to be complete. So he stayed, he watched, and he waited. Back in seat 1A. Nia placed the tray to the side and sipped what was left of the cold tea. She didn't want to cry. Crying gave people too much to interpret, too much to reduce. If she cried, she'd be called fragile. If she didn't, she'd be called cold. Either way, they would write her character for her. So she chose stillness again. Stillness was power. Diego passed by quietly, collecting trays. When he reached Nia, he paused. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the untouched salad. Nia nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost inaudible. "I really tried to find something better." "I know," Nia replied gently. "It's not your fault." Diego hesitated, then leaned down. "She's watching everything I do. I just started this job 3 weeks ago. I didn't think it would be like this." Nia looked up at him. His face was tired, his shoulders tense. "You're doing the right thing," she said. He gave a sad smile. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Not yet. Diego moved on. The cabin dimmed again. The meal service wrapped. The curtain closed softly behind the galley, and the silence returned. This time, it wasn't curated, it was earned. The cabin had grown hushed. Most of the overhead lights were off now, replaced by a soft ambient glow. First class was settling into its manufactured tranquility. Pillows had been distributed, wine glasses cleared, and window shades pulled down. To any outside observer, it looked serene, but serenity was a lie. Nia Lambert sat motionless in her seat, a book in her hands, though her eyes hadn't moved past the same paragraph in 10 minutes. The letters on the page blurred together, not from exhaustion but from the weight of everything unspoken. She'd hoped to find comfort in familiar words. She had tried to distract herself with galaxies and theories and the slow spiral of planetary formation. But no matter how far the pages tried to take her, the air around her kept pulling her back. She reached up and tapped the small reading light above her pod. A soft white beam cast a quiet circle over her lap. It was just enough to see her book clearly. She exhaled, leaned back, and started again from the top of the page. 10 minutes passed. Then came the shadow. Colleen Briggs stood at the edge of the pod, arms crossed lightly in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence was not accidental. "Miss Lambert," she said, her voice pitched low, "I'm going to need you to turn off your light." Nia blinked, confused. She lowered the book slowly. "I'm sorry. What the forward-facing pods are causing a glare against the front bulkhead. It's disturbing other passengers who are trying to rest." Nia glanced around. Everyone else's lights were on. Bryce was scrolling through his tablet screen. The brightness turned high. Eleanor was flipping through a magazine under her own reading light. "Is someone complaining?" Nia asked gently. Colleen's lips pressed together. "It's standard courtesy in overnight service. We ask that you reduce lighting if it's unnecessary. I'm reading," Nia said simply, "and other passengers are trying to sleep." Nia considered this for a moment. Her jaw tensed, but her voice remained calm. "With respect, I can see that multiple lights are still on. Mine is no brighter than theirs." Colleen stepped closer. "I'm trying to maintain a peaceful cabin environment. Miss Lambert, I'd like your cooperation." Nia stared up at her. This was not about light, not really. She reached up and turned the light off. The pod fell into shadow. Colleen gave a curt nod and walked away. Nia sat in the dark, the book still resting in her lap. But now it was unreadable. The words were there, but they meant nothing. A knot tightened in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel out of place in a space she had earned. It wouldn't be the last. But the exhaustion that came from it was like an anchor on her lungs. It pulled her down in waves. She blinked quickly. She would not cry. She refused to give Colleen that satisfaction. From a few rows back, Diego had seen the entire exchange. He waited until Colleen disappeared behind the galley curtain, then approached Nia's seat quietly. He crouched beside the pod and kept his voice low. "Your light wasn't bothering anyone?" Nia didn't answer. She looked at him, her eyes sharp but tired. "She wanted me to feel like a problem," she whispered. "That's all." Diego hesitated. He looked around, then back at her. "You're not the problem." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it for me," he replied. There was silence between them for a moment. Then he rose, gave a slight nod, and returned to the galley. Back in economy. Jerome Lambert had paused mid-note. He had witnessed the moment from afar, had seen his daughter's posture stiffen as Colleen spoke to her. He didn't need to hear the words to understand what had happened. He had seen that maneuver too many times, use the rules, bend them just enough to create the illusion of fairness, make it look like policy, make it seem neutral. He resumed typing. Passenger asked to turn off reading light despite others using theirs. Lead FA claimed disruption without evidence. Unequal enforcement of cabin norms. Clear targeting. He scrolled back through the full log. The story was unfolding in real time, piece by piece. Each action was small enough to deny, but together they formed a wall no apology could climb over. Jerome closed the Notes app and opened his voice recorder. He clicked it on, tucked the phone back into his jacket pocket, and closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to listen. The plane flew on, up in first class. Nia stared out the window into the darkness. Nothing but black beyond the glass, no stars, no moon, just the hollow space between where she was and where she wanted to be. She pressed her forehead lightly to the cool surface. She remembered what her father once said as they lay on the grass in their backyard, watching the sky on a summer night. Light travels across millions of miles just to reach you, he told her. Even when you don't see it, it's still coming. Always. She whispered the words now, more to herself than anyone else. Even when I don't see it? Then she opened her journal again, still in the dark, and she wrote. She didn't need the light to tell her what she knew. The hush in the cabin had turned eerie. The soft hum of the plane provided the only consistent sound as most passengers drifted into the strange, in-between sleep that long-haul flights invite. Light snores echoed from a few seats. The window shades were all drawn. The service carts had been locked. First class had transformed into its nighttime mode, a place where even breathing too loudly seemed impolite. Nia Lambert was awake, still seated in her pod, still in the dark. The glow from her seat control cast a faint blue ring over her hands. She hadn't tried to turn the light back on. She wasn't sure what would happen if she did. She was exhausted, but not in the way sleep could fix. The quiet around her wasn't rest. It was a silence that felt designed to erase. Suddenly, the spell broke. A sharp gasp cut through the cabin. Then a shriek. "Oh my God, my bracelet, it's gone. My diamond bracelet is gone." Eleanor Whitmore's voice rang out, panicked and sharp. It startled several passengers awake. A few heads lifted groggily. Bryce sat upright beside her, looking around in alarm. "What do you mean, gone?" he asked. "I took it off just a moment ago to put lotion on. I set it right here on the tray table, and now it's gone." She began frantically patting down the space around her seat, pulling open compartments and lifting her blanket. The panic in her voice grew. "I don't see it. It was right here." Bryce stood up and started checking the floor, getting on his knees to scan under the seats. His voice was clipped with stress. Colleen appeared almost instantly, alert and in control. "What's happened?" "Mrs. Whitmore." "My bracelet," Eleanor said, voice tight with urgency. "My anniversary gift from Bryce, a custom diamond bangle. It's gone. We'll find it," Colleen said, her tone calm but serious. "Try to remain seated. We'll do a full sweep." "Diego," she called out. Diego emerged from the galley with a flashlight. "Check under the seats in rows 1 and 2, Colleen ordered. Nia watched the scene unfold from her pod. She had not moved. Her hands remained on her lap. She could feel the tension ripple across the cabin like a wave just before it crashes. The flashlight beam darted across the floor. Diego crouched low, checking the carpet and every small space around the pods. Bryce began muttering under his breath. "Unbelievable. This is why standards have dropped." Then came the pause. Eleanor stopped moving. Her head turned slowly toward Nia's pod. "She's been awake," she said suddenly. "She's been sitting there this whole time, just watching." Nia felt the blood drain from her face. The words had not been loud, but they were enough. Everyone in the cabin turned. Heads emerged from behind seat partitions. Eyes widened. Nia didn't respond. She sat perfectly still. "You saw it, didn't you?" Eleanor said. "You saw me place it on the table. You were right there." Bryce stepped closer. It would have been so easy. Small piece of jewelry, no one watching. Just pocket it. "I didn't see anything," Nia said finally, her voice even but tight. Eleanor leaned in slightly. "You've been staring at us all night, acting like you don't belong here." Nia's fingers clenched the edge of the seat. Diego stood up, shaking his head. "We haven't found anything yet. Let's not jump to..." She was right there. Eleanor interrupted. Ask her to open her bag. It's probably inside. Colleen's eyes lit up like she had been waiting for that cue. She stepped toward Nia's pod, her posture changing. Her voice became official. Miss Lambert, given the circumstances and the value of the missing item, we would appreciate your cooperation in allowing us to check your personal belongings. Nia blinked. She wasn't sure if she'd heard correctly. You want to search my bag? She asked. Colleen nodded. It's a simple check. If there's nothing there, then there's nothing to worry about. Nia felt the heat rising in her chest. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but fury. No, she said. There was a pause. It was the kind of pause that made every passenger lean forward just a little. I beg your pardon, Colleen said. I said no, Nia repeated, louder this time. You're not searching my bag. Colleen's expression hardened. Miss Lambert, if you refuse to cooperate, I will have to notify the captain. We can request that you be detained for questioning when we land. You have no right to accuse me, Nia said, voice steady. You have no right to imply that I took anything without a single shred of evidence. She turned her head, locking eyes with Eleanor. And you're accusing me because I'm the only one here who doesn't look like you. That's it. That's the whole story. Let's not pretend it's anything else. Gasps rippled across the cabin. Eleanor's mouth fell open in mock horror. How dare you suggest that Nia didn't let her finish? You're not upset your bracelet is missing. You're upset because I'm in first class and I'm not afraid of you. Colleen's voice cut through the tension. This is completely inappropriate. No, Nia said. What's inappropriate is that you've ignored me all flight, withheld services, humiliated me, and now you're threatening me in front of a cabin full of people based on nothing but a stereotype. Diego stepped forward then, his face pale but his voice clear. She's right. Colleen turned on him. Excuse me, Diego's voice shook slightly, but he didn't stop. This isn't protocol. We're supposed to log the incident and notify ground security after landing. We don't conduct searches ourselves, and we certainly don't target passengers without cause. You're a trainee, Colleen hissed. You don't know how to handle this kind of situation. I know enough to know this is wrong, Diego said. For a moment, everything froze. Then Eleanor let out a loud gasp. Oh my goodness. Look, Bryce. She held something up between her fingers. A bracelet, thin, silver, glinting under the dim cabin light. It was inside my eye mask case. It must have slipped in when I set it down. Her voice was filled with forced laughter. Silly me. All that fuss for nothing. She did not look at Nia. Colleen turned away abruptly, snatching the flashlight from Diego's hand. Well, she said tightly, I'm glad we resolved that. She walked off without another word. The rest of the cabin watched in silence. Nia slowly leaned back into her seat, her body buzzing with adrenaline and rage. Her hands were still trembling, but she refused to show it. Her shoulders remained square, her jaw firm. She'd never felt more exposed, or more sure of who she was. From the back of the plane, Jerome Lambert stopped recording. He had captured every word. And now, he was no longer just observing. He was preparing. The cabin remained hushed, not from peace, but from the tension left behind like static in the air. Eleanor Whitmore had retreated to her seat without apology, the missing bracelet now resting conspicuously on her wrist. Bryce had sunk back into his reclined position, muttering into his glass of scotch. Colleen had vanished behind the galley curtain. Her presence temporarily dissolved. Nia Lambert hadn't moved. She sat with her hands clasped together in her lap, her shoulders held back like a cord of tension pulled straight through her spine. Her breathing was measured, almost too even, the way someone breathes when they're trying not to cry. No one had apologized, not for the accusation, not for the threat of detention, not for suggesting that her presence in first class warranted suspicion. And worst of all, no one had stood up for her. Not until Diego. Nia turned her head slightly and saw him standing near the galley. His hands clenched at his sides, his eyes downcast. There was a flush in his cheeks, a look of someone who had just crossed a line and wasn't sure what came next. She watched him for a moment, then slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Her legs felt unsteady, her feet cold against the cabin floor. But she walked forward, one quiet step at a time, until she reached the curtain where Diego stood. He looked up in surprise. "I just wanted to say thank you," Nia said softly. He blinked, as if no one had thanked him in days. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," he replied. "I've seen her do things, to other passengers, but nothing like tonight." Nia tilted her head. "Then why stay? I need this job," he said. "My mom's medical bills are heavy. This job was the only thing I could get with benefits after school." His voice cracked slightly, and he rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought I could stay invisible long enough to get through probation. I thought silence was survival." "It is," Nia said, "until it isn't." They looked at each other, the air between them heavy but shared. From the cockpit, the chime rang softly, signaling the descent to mid-flight cruising. A quiet announcement followed, advising passengers to prepare for rest and that no further service would be offered for the next few hours. As Nia turned to go back to her seat, Colleen emerged again. Her lips were pursed. Her eyes scanned Nia, then Diego, then the rest of the cabin. "Miss Lambert," she said, her voice clipped and managerial, "I'll need you to return to your seat immediately. We are preparing for crew rest." Nia faced her fully. "I will, but I'd like to make something clear before I do." Colleen raised a brow. "I don't know what you think you saw in me, or what you've been assuming since I boarded this flight, but I paid for this seat. I earned this seat. I didn't get here through favors or charity, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel ashamed for being where I belong." Several passengers stirred, their interest renewed. Colleen crossed her arms. "This is not the place for a lecture." "No," Nia said calmly, "but it seems to be the place for humiliation." Behind her, Jerome Lambert stood. His presence shifted the atmosphere instantly. No longer slouched in his economy seat, no longer pretending to be anyone else. He walked forward through the curtain, past startled passengers, past a stunned Bryce and an awkwardly silent Eleanor. He stopped beside his daughter. Colleen blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir," she began. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Jerome reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin black card. The logo of Equinox Air gleamed against the leather of his wallet. The back bore his name in bold print, Jerome C., Lambert founder and Chief Executive Officer, Equinox Aviation Group. The entire cabin froze. A few jaws fell open. A woman near 3D let out a sharp gasp. Even Bryce muttered something under his breath. Colleen's face turned pale. Jerome tucked the card away without a word, then looked directly at her. "My daughter," he said slowly, has displayed more grace, restraint, and professionalism in the past 6 hours than I have seen from this crew in an entire career of flying." Colleen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jerome continued. "I boarded this flight in economy by choice. I was auditing our long-haul premium service anonymously. What I've observed is systemic bias, selective enforcement of policy, and the public targeting of a black teenager for simply existing in a seat she earned." He turned to the other passengers. "I imagine some of you were uncomfortable watching that unfold. I hope you were. I hope it stays with you." The silence was absolute. "I founded this airline to be different, to do better, and I will not tolerate staff who poison the culture we've spent years trying to build." He looked directly at Colleen again. "Collect your belongings. You are no longer employed by Equinox Air." Her lips trembled. You can't do that." "I just did," Jerome said quietly. Diego stepped back in disbelief. His mouth opened, then closed, unsure whether to smile or cry. A few passengers clapped softly. The applause grew, a ripple of relief and release. It was not loud, but it was full. Jerome turned back to Naya. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. "I will be." He smiled and touched her shoulder. "You always are." Naya sat back down. Diego approached, his voice still hushed. "Mr. Lambert, sir, thank you. You earned your uniform tonight," Jerome said. "I hope you'll stay. There's change coming." Diego's face lit up. As Jerome turned to leave, he looked back at Colleen one last time. "You may gather your things in Zurich. Security will escort you from the gate." And with that, he disappeared behind the curtain. Nia leaned back in her seat. The stars outside the window were faint but present now. The clouds had cleared. She opened her journal, and for the first time in hours, she smiled. The silence that followed was unlike the silence before. It was not laced with fear or shame. This time, it was charged with quiet awe. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation sat with changed posture, their movements softer, their glances toward Nia less weighted by assumption and more tempered by awareness. No one dared whisper about her now. No one questioned whether she belonged in first class. She had not moved from her seat, and yet the space around her had shifted entirely. Diego returned a moment later, a folded blanket in his arms. "Miss Lambert," he said gently, placing the blanket on her armrest. "In case you want a rest." "Thank you," she said. Her voice was tired but unshaken. He lingered, then added, "They're calling in Zurich, from corporate. Word's already spread." She gave a small nod. "Good." Then she looked out the window again. She was beginning to understand something her father had always told her. The quietest moments often held the most power. Not the public speeches, not the viral videos, not the interviews, but the stillness afterward. The moment the noise fell away and the world waited to see what would follow. Back in economy, Jerome had returned to his seat. His phone buzzed. 3 messages, all from the executive assistant to the board, 1 from legal, 2 from PR. He put the phone away without reading further. There would be fallout. Of course there would be. Press questions, contracts to review, internal procedures to update, a full HR investigation. But for the first time in years, he felt no hesitation. There was a difference between managing a crisis and correcting a culture. He wasn't interested in spin. He was interested in truth. Up front, Bryce Whitmore had finished his drink. He turned to his wife, voice low. "That man," he muttered, He had no right to speak to you like that. Embarrassing you in public." Eleanor's face was still red, though from embarrassment or anger, it wasn't clear. I can't believe she stayed in her seat like nothing happened. She said, "That girl, just sitting there like she won." Bryce gritted his teeth. "I don't care who he is. No teenager talks to you like that. No employee fires someone in front of passengers." He signaled a nearby attendant, one of the substitutes from the Zurich crew that had rotated in mid-flight. "Excuse me," Bryce said. "Can we speak with the captain? We'd like to file a formal complaint." The flight attendant hesitated. "I'm not sure we're shareholders." Bryce lied. "We demand proper documentation of this incident." The attendant nodded slowly and disappeared toward the cockpit. Eleanor leaned in toward Bryce. Her father made a scene, but he won't be able to protect her forever. Bryce nodded, his jaw tight. Behind them, Nia didn't need to hear the words to know the war wasn't over. She could feel it in her skin. There was a price for dignity. There always had been, and now it would be tested again. 20 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. The captain himself stepped out, tall and polished in his formal uniform, with silver streaks in his hair and a voice that suggested authority shaped by thousands of hours in the air. "Good evening," he said to the cabin in general, then directed his attention toward Nia. "Miss Lambert," he began, "I've just been made aware of the incident, and I wanted to apologize for the conduct you experienced." She blinked in surprise, not because of his words, but because he had addressed her first. The captain nodded solemnly. "Equinox is an airline that takes pride in its principles. Our mission was built on inclusion and dignity. What happened tonight falls short of that mission. I appreciate that," Nia said. The captain turned toward the rest of the passengers. "And for those of you who were affected by the disruption, I thank you for your patience. Let this be a reminder that silence in the face of mistreatment is never the correct course, and that our policies must apply equally, regardless of status, background, or perception." With that, he turned and returned to the cockpit. The cabin was quiet again, but it was not discomfort this time. It was reflection. Even the Whitmores sat silently now. Nia opened her journal and wrote one line. "The plane did not land, but something inside me did." At the back of the plane, Jerome received another buzz. This time, it was a news alert. Someone had tweeted about the incident. A blurry photo had surfaced Nia, standing calmly beside her seat while Colleen stood beside her. The caption read, "Teen girl accused of stealing bracelet in first class. Turns out she's the CEO's daughter," and he was on the flight. The post had already been shared 15,000 times. He exhaled slowly. He knew how fast these things moved. The truth was already airborne. Now it would become its own kind of turbulence. 30 minutes before landing, the cabin lights came on again. People stirred. Windows opened. Shoes were slid back on. Makeup reapplied. Laptops closed. The transformation was almost mechanical, as if the entire night had not happened, as if the tension, the tears, the silent battles had been forgotten like a dream one is eager to leave behind. But for Nia, the memory was not fading. It was etched in her body, in her palms, in her voice. She sat up straight, clipped her belt again, and waited. The wheels touched down in Zurich just after 7 a.m. Outside the window, the morning sky had begun to stretch with pale light. A soft, golden hue sat above the airport tarmac. The air felt clearer, crisper, as if the sky itself had reset. The moment the plane taxied to a stop, 3 security officers stepped onto the aircraft. They walked to Colleen Briggs, who had quietly taken a seat in the jump seat near the rear exit. She did not protest. She stood and walked with them, head bowed, her uniform now stiff with finality. No handcuffs, or no struggle, just consequence. Eleanor watched from her seat, her mouth slightly open. Bryce, too, remained quiet. No more demands for the captain. No more threats of shareholder status, just silence. At the jet bridge, as passengers began to disembark, Diego waited near the front door, greeting each traveler with a quiet thank you and a respectful nod. When Nia reached him, he extended his hand. She shook it. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he replied, "and thank you for everything." She smiled faintly. "See you in the skies," and then she walked down the jet bridge. Her father waited for her at the terminal gate, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. He did not speak. He simply held out his hand. She took it. Together. They walked into the morning light. The Zurich terminal felt like a different world. Glass walls flooded the arrivals area with natural light. Travelers wheeled bags across polished floors, barely noticing the pair walking side by side near Gate 47. One of them was a teenage girl in black sneakers and a quiet stare. The other was a man in a dark suit, his presence unassuming but unmistakably anchored. Jerome Lambert and his daughter moved wordlessly toward customs, neither rushing nor lingering. Their silence wasn't strained. It was the kind that comes after a storm, steady, exhausted, alive. As they stood in line, a young woman with a press badge around her neck approached slowly, holding her phone in both hands like it might break. Mr. Lambert Jerome turned, his expression unreadable. "I'm with Zurich now. We heard there was an incident on Equinox Flight 307. Are you willing to comment on what happened?" Nia felt the weight of attention shift toward her again. Her pulse flickered, but she didn't flinch. Jerome met the reporter's gaze calmly. "We'll release a statement soon, but for now, I'll just say this dignity is not a privilege, and what happened last night should never happen to any child, in any seat, on any airline." The reporter's hands trembled slightly as she pressed record. "Was it true your daughter was accused of theft during the flight?" Jerome paused. "Yes, and it was false." Then he turned away, gently guiding Nia forward with one hand on her shoulder. No more words were needed. By the time they reached baggage claim, the story had already gone live. A breaking news banner scrolled across monitors above the carousel. "Equinox CEO witnesses, daughter falsely accused on flight, terminates crew member mid-air." Nia stared at it, her face pale. "It's everywhere already," she murmured. Jerome nodded slowly. "You okay with that?" She looked up at him. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm not hiding either." He smiled. That was his daughter. Strong, not because she was unshaken, but because she chose to stand anyway. They waited for their bags in silence. Behind them, a group of business travelers watched the screen, murmuring in languages that Nia couldn't quite follow but understood all the same. Their glances were subtle but sharp. The cameras might have captured the incident, but they would never fully show the aftermath. The hours of unease, the awkward stares, the headlines that simplified pain into sound bites. That was what the cameras always missed. The days after, 3 days later, back in San Francisco, the Equinox Aviation Group headquarters stood in the heart of the financial district. a glass tower with jet trails etched into its exterior panels, designed to reflect the movement of air, speed, and transparency. But now, the building buzzed with tension. Inside the executive boardroom on the 32nd floor, a crisis meeting was underway. Around the polished oval table sat 12 board members. Half of them were watching the viral clip on loop. The rest were sifting through HR reports, press statements, and legal memos. Jerome sat at the head of the table, composed but unflinching. "I appreciate you all coming in on short notice," he began. "I imagine most of you have seen the footage." "Seen it," replied Margaret Lynn, VP of Legal Affairs. "It's been downloaded over 8 million times. We've been tagged in articles from every major outlet. People are angry," added Antoine Rojas, the brand strategist. "But they're not just angry at the flight attendant. They're questioning whether we're living up to the values we claim." Jerome nodded. "They should be questioning that." There was a moment of uncomfortable quiet. Then Raj Kulkarni, the COO, leaned forward. "You acted decisively, Jerome. No one here is disputing that. But some of us feel blindsided by the way it was handled. A public firing without informing leadership. You know how shareholders react to chaos." Jerome's voice remained calm. "Let me be clear. This wasn't chaos. It was clarity. It was a line in the sand." Margaret spoke again. "HR is working to finalize Colleen Briggs's formal termination. She is already lawyered up. There may be a wrongful termination lawsuit. Let her sue," Jerome said. "We'll stand by our policies. We have the footage. We have the flight logs. We have the passenger testimonies." He took a breath. "And we have my name on that cabin log as both CEO and parent." Someone shifted in their seat. The sound echoed. "Jerome," Antoine said cautiously. "This could affect our merger negotiations with TransSky. They might view this as instability." Jerome shook his head. "If they see accountability as instability, they're not the kind of partner we want." Another pause. Then, surprisingly, Margaret leaned back and said, "He's right." Eyes turned toward her. "I've sat through a dozen of these in my career. Usually, we try to bury it, spin it, dilute it with talking points. But not this time." She looked at Jerome. "What you did was risky, but it was the kind of risk we founded this airline to take." Jerome nodded once. "Good, because we're not done yet." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a printed document. It was titled Passenger Dignity Protocol Flight Integrity Initiative. He passed copies down the table. The proposal included mandatory empathy-based training for all cabin crew, real-time reporting tools for passengers, and a policy that gave frontline crew the power to escalate bias complaints directly to HQ without fear of retaliation. "I want this implemented in 60 days, Jerome said. "All flights, all routes, all staff." Antoine flipped through the packet. "You're calling it the Lambert Clause?" he asked quietly. Jerome didn't look up. "I didn't name it." He paused, then added, "But I'll own it." That evening, Nia sat by her bedroom window back in Oakland. The hills behind her bathed in twilight. Her journal lay open in her lap. She hadn't posted anything about the flight. No videos, no hashtags, just silence. And still, the messages had come, hundreds of them, from strangers, teenagers, flight attendants, parents, quiet people who had been dismissed, stared at, spoken over, people who saw themselves in her silence, who had never known they were allowed to say something. She read them slowly, one by one. A message from a black mother in Atlanta. My daughter watched you stand there and not shrink. She saw you hold your voice steady. She's never seen that before. Thank you. Another from a young gay flight attendant in Dallas. I've wanted to say something on flights for years. I didn't. You did. I'm done being quiet now. And another, unsigned. I don't know you, but I believe in you. Naya didn't reply to all of them. She couldn't, but she carried them all with her. And then, in the quiet of her room, she opened her journal and wrote, "They saw me stand. But they don't know I almost didn't. What the world sees is the headline. What matters is what comes after." The ripple began where they always do, quietly, at the edge. It started with a single video clip, then another. A young girl, calm and composed, standing tall while being accused of theft in first class. The moment her father stepped forward with a CEO badge. The camera angle wobbled, but the audio was clear. The applause was real. The shame on the accusers' faces unmistakable. It went viral faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, "Dignity is not a privilege" was trending in 5 countries. Journalists flooded Equinox inbox. News anchors called Nia by name on morning shows. Bloggers dug through past Equinox passenger reviews, finding stories that now read very differently in the light of what had happened. Talk shows debated what the real issue was. Racism, classism, corporate optics, parental protection. Everyone had an angle. But to Naya, the only thing that mattered was what she saw in the mirror each morning, and the girl staring back was no longer apologizing for her presence. She wasn't chasing the attention, but she wouldn't run from it either. Her phone lit up with messages from her old classmates, some from peers she had never spoken to. "You gave us all something we didn't know we needed. I didn't think I could be brave until I saw what brave actually looked like. You didn't yell. You didn't even raise your voice. And still, they heard you." A teacher at her high school forwarded an invitation from a local college. Would she be willing to come speak at a youth forum about grace under pressure? Her hands trembled when she opened the email, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she couldn't say no, not anymore. She drafted a response, read it twice, then clicked send. Yes, I would be honored. Meanwhile, in the Equinox boardroom, the atmosphere had changed. Jerome stood by the digital display, which now showed the company's updated public trust index. A week ago, their score had dipped dangerously low after the initial story broke. But now, the line was climbing again, not because of spin, but because of action. The passenger dignity protocol was already underway. New hire orientations included bias training. An independent task force had been launched to audit all discrimination complaints over the past 5 years. Several had already led to voluntary resignations. In-flight crew scheduling had also changed. No longer would the most senior attendants automatically get the elite first-class assignments. Instead, each flight rotation would include a crew member specifically trained in equitable service. Jerome clicked to the next slide. The Lambert Clause was now included in the company's core code of conduct. Some board members had resisted at first, but public support had silenced their hesitation. Now they wanted to ride the momentum. Now they saw the value in being first. First to apologize. First to change. First to rebuild trust, not as a brand strategy, but as a moral imperative. Still, Jerome knew this kind of reform wasn't a finish line. It was a threshold, and the work had just begun. That night, Nia sat at her desk with her speech draft glowing on the screen. She read the first paragraph aloud. "I didn't ask to be the girl in that video, but now that I am, I want to use it to say something real, not just about what happened to me, but about what's happened to people like me for years, quietly, repeatedly, without cameras." She paused. She scrolled down. Her speech wasn't filled with statistics. It wasn't lined with anger either. Instead, it was stitched with stories. Of the time she got followed around in a store while her white friend was offered assistance. Of the teacher who once told her she was so articulate in a tone that felt like surprise. Of the counselor who suggested community college. Even after seeing her perfect GPA, these moments were not as loud as being accused of theft in public, but they built the same walls, invisible, yet heavy. And Nia's voice now had the power to push against them. She closed the file and leaned back, the tension in her spine slowly melting. Outside her window, the neighborhood was quiet. Oakland's skyline shimmered faintly under the night sky. Streetlights painted long, golden lines across the sidewalk. A breeze moved the trees in slow rhythm. She felt something she hadn't felt in days. Peace. Not because everything had been fixed, but because she had found her place in the story. And it was no longer the role they had tried to write for her. She was no longer the accused, no longer the exception. She was not a footnote. She was the author now, at the same moment. Eleanor Whitmore sat on the balcony of her San Francisco condo, sipping from a glass of wine that no longer tasted elegant. Her phone vibrated for the 5th time in a row. Bryce was pacing inside, shouting into his phone, "I told you, it wasn't our fault. That girl was acting suspicious. The airline overreacted. My wife was the victim here, but no one was listening anymore. Their invitations to the Trans-Sky Gala had been rescinded. Their interview offer with Morning Digest had been revoked. Suddenly, their name was not just linked to wealth, but to entitlement and bias. Their friends were silent. Their PR rep had quit." Eleanor scrolled through the comments on the news coverage, entitled, "Ignorant. Cowards." She closed her eyes for the first time. Shame felt heavier than anger, not because she'd been caught, but because, deep down, she realized she'd been exactly what people said she was. She couldn't rewrite what happened, and the world would not let her forget. Back in the Lambert household, Jerome stepped into Nia's room and handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Just something I thought you might want to read." Inside was a printed letter from a retired flight attendant. The handwriting was elegant and slanted. "Dear Miss Lambert, I spent 30 years flying international routes. I saw many things I wish I could forget. But I want to thank you for doing something I never had the courage to do. You reminded me that integrity isn't loud, it's steady. You reminded me of who I wanted to be when I first pinned on my wings. Thank you, with respect, Catherine L., retired purser, Equinox Air." Nia held the letter to her chest. She didn't speak. Jerome sat on the edge of her bed. "You've already changed the flight path for so many," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't plan any of this." She replied. "No," he said, "but you didn't flinch when it chose you." She smiled, not because it was easy, but because it finally felt like truth. The auditorium was quiet except for the soft thud of footsteps on the wooden stage. Rows of chairs stretched back into dimness. Students, educators, parents, and reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, holding their breath in that long collective pause before a voice breaks silence. Nia Lambert stepped into the light. She wore a simple blazer, jeans, and sneakers. No glitter, no script in her hands, only a folded piece of paper in her back pocket and a steady resolve in her chest. She looked out across the room and exhaled. "My name is Nia," she began. "I'm 16. I like space documentaries and dried mango. I keep a journal and talk too fast when I get nervous." A few soft laughs rose from the crowd. "And a few weeks ago, I was just another passenger on a flight to Zurich." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by calm focus. "I didn't plan to become a headline. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to stay quiet when someone decided I didn't belong in first class. When someone saw my skin before they saw my humanity." She let that sentence sit in the air. "I was accused of stealing. I was asked to prove my innocence before anyone proved my guilt. And even when the truth came out, no one said, 'I'm sorry.' Not then." A flicker of sadness passed across her face, but she didn't break. But something else happened. I saw people begin to question what they always assumed. I saw the way truth makes some people squirm and makes others stand taller. She took a step closer to the front of the stage. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just told the truth. The audience was completely silent, and because of that, people started listening. She pulled the folded paper from her back pocket and glanced at it before continuing. "I want to talk to anyone who has ever been made to feel like they're the exception, like they're lucky to be invited, like their presence is something to be tolerated, not celebrated." She looked up again. "You're not the exception. You are the rule. The rule is everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves to be seen fully, not just tolerated, but valued." The room responded with quiet affirmation. A few heads nodded, a hand clapped once, then others followed. Nia smiled gently. "I didn't do anything heroic. I sat in my seat. I didn't apologize for it, and I didn't move." She paused. "And sometimes that's enough to change the story." As she stepped away from the podium, the audience rose to its feet. The applause swelled, not in frenzy, but in respect. It was not for a celebrity. It was for a girl who had made people feel brave by being brave herself. Backstage, Jerome watched his daughter with quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything. The way he looked at her said more than words ever could. He reached into his coat pocket and gripped the small journal he had carried with him on the flight to Zurich. The one with his handwritten notes from that night. The one that had begun as a secret audit and turned into a personal reckoning. Beside him, Margaret Lynn waited with a digital tablet in hand. On it was a draft of the new Equinox campaign launching the next morning. It read, "Every seat earned. Every passenger seen." Margaret glanced over at Jerome. "She's changed everything," she said. Jerome nodded. "She just reminded us of what we said we believed, and made us actually live it." In a studio 2 blocks from the Equinox headquarters, Diego Rivas sat in front of a microphone. His voice was steady, warm, and honest. He was recording the first segment of a new training series for incoming flight attendants. "Welcome to Equinox's Flight Integrity Series," he began. "This is not just another safety protocol. This is about what happens when the lights are low and the doors are sealed and you have 40,000 feet of sky between you and the ground." He leaned forward. "This is about how we treat people when we think no one's watching." He paused. I used to believe staying quiet was the safest choice. I don't believe that anymore. And I hope, by the end of this training, neither will you." He clicked off the mic and looked through the glass where a producer gave him a thumbs up. Somewhere in that moment, he felt it again, that flicker of courage he'd nearly buried. And this time, he didn't look away. At the airport in Zurich, a new plaque had been installed near the first-class boarding lounge. It was small and brushed silver, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. It read, "In honor of every voice that chose to speak, every soul that chose to stay seated, and every flight that dared to fly higher." Nia didn't know about the plaque. Not yet, but she would, because change is a ripple, and ripples always return. On a bright spring morning, Nia stood at gate 15 holding her boarding pass. Her mother hugged her tightly before she stepped away. "You call me the second you land," her mother said, brushing imaginary lint from Nia's sleeve. "I will." "Mom," Nia promised. Jerome stood beside them, hands in his coat pockets. "Ready?" he asked. Nia looked at him, then at the plane waiting beyond the glass. "I think so. First solo flight," he said. "Big milestone." She smiled. "I'll be fine." She boarded with confidence this time. No tension in her shoulders, no fear in her gut. She found her seat, placed her journal in the side pocket, and smiled politely at the crew who offered her water. One of them, a young attendant with kind eyes, bent down slightly. "Miss Lambert," he said, "we're honored to have you flying with us." She blinked. "You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are." She smiled. "I'm just a passenger." "Yes," he said, "and now, so many more people know what that should really mean." As the engines hummed and the aircraft taxied to the runway, Nia closed her eyes. This time, the air felt different, not because it was quiet, but because it was honest. Because sometimes the best kind of justice isn't loud. It's the kind that lands softly, like wheels on a runway, firm and final, and then takes off again, higher than before. Nia's story is more than a moment on a flight. It is a mirror held up to our society reflecting the invisible walls we build through bias and indifference. It reminds us how deeply hurtful discrimination can be, and yet how powerful dignity and quiet strength are in pushing back against it. As we close this chapter, let us hold close the courage of those who choose to stand firm when the world tries to erase them. Let us reject the whispers of prejudice that try to define worth by skin color or class. Because true justice is not about loud victories, but about everyday acts of respect and humanity. Thank you for listening to Nia's journey. If her story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge us to be better and do better. Together, we can create a world where every seat is earned and every passenger is truly seen. Stay tuned for more real-life stories where character matters above all else.